In this lesson, you're going to learn about event acknowledgements in socket.io. Now, as the name suggests, an event acknowledgement allows the receiver of the event to acknowledge that it received and processed the event. Now, an example use case for this would be sending a location or sending a message. The client sends the location or the message off to the server, but it's never quite sure that the server received it and actually did something with it. With an acknowledgement, the client would get notified that the message or the location was indeed delivered successfully. So that's what we're going to focus on setting up, and we'll start this process over inside of Visual Studio Code in chat.js. Now, for the moment, what I'm going to do is just paste in a couple of comments just to solidify this idea one more time. So if the server emits the event, that means the client is the receiver. The client can send back an acknowledgement to the server, allowing the server to know that the client processed it. The same thing works in the other direction. If the client is emitting the event, that means the server is receiving it, and the server could send an acknowledgement back. Now, obviously, acknowledgements are optional since we haven't been using them so far, so let's go ahead and see how we would actually implement these into our project. To get started, we'll work with our sendMessage event, which is emitted from the client and received by the server. Now, an acknowledgement is the client getting notified that the event was received and processed, and the code that's going to run is provided as the last argument to emit. So we have our event name. We have as many arguments for the data as we want to. In this case, it's just one. It could be 0. It could be 6. Then we provide a function as the final argument. This is going to run when the event is acknowledged. And all we're going to do is use console.log to say something like, the message was delivered. Perfect. Now, with this in place, what we need to do is make a change to the server as well. Right now, the client is expecting this event to be acknowledged, but it's never going to be acknowledged. We fix that by making a very small change to the event listener. So over in index.js, what we do is we find the event listener for that event. In this case, it's right here. And we set up another parameter for the callback function. Right here, we add a final one on called callback or something similar, and we call this to acknowledge the event. Right here, I can call it at the bottom of the function after I've shared the message with everyone. Now, with this in place, we have a basic acknowledgement set up. Over in the browser, let's test this out. So what I'm going to do is refresh the browser, and I will send a message. This is a test. I'll send it. I can see the message down below, and after it was delivered, I have my little confirmation letting me know that my message was delivered successfully. Now, when the server sends the acknowledgement back to the client, it could also choose to provide some data. So as an example, right here, I could provide as many arguments to this function as I wanted to. For now, I could just say something like delivered. And then over inside of chat.js, I would have access to that argument. So over here, this function is now going to get called with that single argument. I could call it something like message, and I could use the message down below. Right here, what I'll do is just add it as the second argument to console.log. Perfect. I'll save all my files and make sure that shows up. So over in the browser, once again, just giving things a quick refresh. I'll type test. I'll click send. I can see the message was delivered, and I can see the message that the server sent to the client as part of the acknowledgement, and there we go. Everything is working really well. So once again, an acknowledgement requires changes on the client and the server. Whoever is emitting the event sets up a callback function. Whoever is receiving the event receives a callback function that it needs to call. And as we just explored, if it wanted to, it could optionally send data back and forth. Now, a great use case for acknowledgement could be something like validation. So maybe, for example, I don't want to allow messages that contain profane language. Now, obviously, that's up to the developer to determine whether or not they want to allow that. But for an example, let's say we want to avoid that language. There's actually an NPM module we can use to integrate this into our project. If we head over to the browser, you can Google npm bad-words, and this is the module we'll be using. Bad words comes pre-populated with a list of bad words, and as the documentation below shows, you can add your own bad words to be excluded. Now, what we're going to do is reject any message that contains foul language. So let's go ahead and start by installing this library and see how we can use event acknowledgements to get this done. So down below, what I'm going to do is use Control-C to shut things down, and then I'm going to install that library. npm I, followed by bad-words at 3.0.0. From here, we're going to go ahead and run the installer. Once that's done, we'll start up our dev server once again by using the up arrow key twice and hitting enter. And now we're going to integrate bad words into our project. So first up, we have to load that module in up top. Const uppercase F filter equals. This is what comes back from requiring the bad words library. If you want to learn more about what the bad words library can do, you can always check out the documentation. Then down below, inside of that function, we're going to go ahead and actually use it to check for profanity in this string message. So right here, the first thing we have to do is initialize bad words. So we're going to create a constant lowercase f filter, and that is going to be a new instance of filter. And then we're going to use a method on there called isProfane. That's going to return either true or false, and we'll use that in an if statement to determine what we want to do. Right here, if we are going to use filter dot, and we can see there are a few methods here. I can add profane words to filter. I can clean the profanity in the message, replacing the profane words with the asterisk symbol. I'm using isProfane though to just check for profanity. And right here, I pass that message in. Now, once again, we're going to get true if it is profane and false otherwise. So right here, this code is only going to run if it is profane. And what we're going to do is use return to stop the function execution. And I'm going to call the callback with an error message, something along the lines of profanity is not allowed. Perfect. Now with this in place, down below, we can go ahead and only emit the message when there is no profanity, and I'll still call the callback to acknowledge that I did send things off. This time though, I'm not going to provide any arguments. So I provide a single string with an error message when an error occurs. Otherwise, I provide nothing like I'm doing down below. Now on the client, we can go ahead and wire it up to actually work with this information. Over here, what I'm going to do in chat.js is the following. Right here, I'm going to change the message parameter over to something a little more explicit like error. And then we're going to set up some code to run, and we'll use a condition inside of here. If there is an error, we'll do one thing, otherwise we'll do something else. So if there is an error, I will stop the function execution and I'll print it, console.log error. If there is no error, I can go ahead and print something like console.log message delivered. Perfect. Now with this in place, we should be able to test out our changes. So what I'm going to do is save chat.js. Over inside of the browser, we're going to refresh our application, and I'm going to send off a regular message. This is a test. I click send or hit enter. I can see my message shows up and message delivered prints, which is great. Now I'll type hell in the box, hit enter, and down below I can see profanity is not allowed. So that message was never sent out. All I got back as the sender was an error. No one else even knew I tried to send it. So acknowledgements can do a lot for us when it comes to creating real-time applications, and now that you know how to use them, you're going to be setting up an acknowledgement for the send location event as well. Down below, I have some challenge comments outlining what I'd like you to do. So right here, I'll paste those in the goal setting up acknowledgement for send location. Now, since the event is being emitted from the client, the first thing you're going to want to do is set up the acknowledgement function on the client, much like we did for send message. Then on the server, you want to make sure that the server sends back the acknowledgement by calling that callback. Now, in this case, there's no need to call it with any arguments whatsoever. You can just call it after the location has indeed been shared with all of those connected clients. Now, when the function on the client runs, what do you want to do when the event is acknowledged? You're just going to print something like location shared to the console. Then test your work. Open up the application in 2 windows. Have one person share the location. You should see the location show up for both windows, and the one who shared the location should have the acknowledgement message as well. Take some time to knock that out, and when you're done, come back and click play. How'd that go? Let's get started by providing a function as the final argument to emit. So right here, I'm going to set that up. That's step 1. Step 2 is to make sure that the server actually sends back an acknowledgement for send location. So over in index.js, we have to find send location, and we have to set up that callback parameter right here, callback or something similarly named. Now, after we emit the message, we're going to go ahead and call the callback, letting the client know that the event has indeed been acknowledged. Right here, we can go ahead and save that as it's the only change we need to make to the server. From chat.js, we can move on to step number 3. When the event is acknowledged, we're going to print location shared. So right here in that function we created, console.log printing location shared. Excellent. Now with this in place, the only thing left to do is to test our work. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and remove the challenge comments, make sure all of my files are saved, and I'll head over to the browser. Right here, I have my first window. I'll also go ahead and create a second window, cracking open the developer tools for that as well. And I'll navigate over to localhost 3000. Now I'm going to send the location as this second user. I click the button. In a second or two, the location should indeed show up, and it does. And the person who actually sent the location has the acknowledgement message. Right here, location shared is printing, which is fantastic. Now that we have this in place, we're all done with acknowledgements. Acknowledgements are really useful for real-time applications. It allows the event emitter to make sure that everything actually went as expected. Now that we have this in place, in the next lesson, we're going to focus on tying acknowledgements and socket.io into the interface, providing a clearer UI for users so they know what exactly is happening. I'm excited to get to that, so let's go ahead and jump right in to the next lesson.